have a bit of a PR problem. One movie, two notes, and suddenly a whole group of animals is cast as the villain of the ocean, a reputation most of them never even deserved. In celebration of Shark and Ray Awareness Month this July, we're shining a light on the misunderstood pups of the deep blue sea, sharks and rays. Expect a handful of fun facts, a few not so fun facts, at least one fact that will shock you, and the good news, plenty of ways you can support conservation efforts in your communities that actually save sharks and rays. We'll also talk about seafood. We love it, our pets love it, but the ways in which it gets to our dinner plates and our pets' bowls is becoming increasingly complicated, and at times, not always the best for our planet and our ecosystems. Get ready to rewrite the soundtrack to summer. Welcome to Barking Mad, a podcast powered by BSM Partners. I'm your host, Jordan Tyler. So to help fix this PR problem, we've brought in two experts. Paul Cox, CEO of the Shark Trust, a UK-based nonprofit that works to improve the conservation status of sharks, skates, and rays. And we also have Wendy Airy-Kent, Conservation Program Manager for the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or the AZA's Safe Shark and Ray Program, which also focuses on the conservation and recovery of endangered shark, skates, and ray species. Naturally, before we got too deep into today's conversation, I wanted to know, what's one misconception about sharks that you hear time and time again?
Okay, I don't know if you call it a misconception, but one of the things that really kind of hits me is that there's such a narrow focus when people think about sharks. When they talk about sharks, they kind of tend to focus on maybe 5-10 species of kind of medium size sharks. And the other thing is we kind of hear this, you quite often hear people saying sharks are this, sharks are that. Actually, we're talking about a group, including the skates and rays, of about 1,250 animals. And there is almost nothing that you can say sharks are this, where you can't find an exception to that rule. So I think we don't do enough celebrating the diversity of the species.
Yes, I think that due to the sensationalism of sharks, through different media outlets, starting way back with Jaws, we tend to think of sharks as these roaming eating machines that are just out there hunting prey, and that all sharks are apex predators. And to kind of tag on to what Paul has said, the largest fish in the sea is a whale shark that eats the tiniest food, plankton. And so when we get drawn into this sensationalism, which is really cool and really fun to see an apex predator hunting, no doubt about that. As humans, we like to see that kind of thing. But we also love to see these gentle giants like basking sharks and whale sharks that are floating through the ocean, so peaceful and just eating plankton. And so again, it's about diversity and making connections for people that these fish are also sharks and they are super cool. So, not all sharks are out there hunting 24/7. As a matter of fact, most of them aren't. But sharks got to eat, right? And the ocean is their home. And so we as human beings need to respect that, just as we would if we were going into the wilderness in Yellowstone, and make sure that we're prepared and we understand what could happen when we enter the ocean.
Paul, I want to come back to you and get maybe your favorite, all-time favorite shark fact, just to have a little bit of fun before we start getting into the nitty-gritty today.
So from a whole world of shark facts, you want me to choose one? Okay, so we'll all have seen sawfish. They're a flat shark with a very long nose, with these teeth around down the outside of the nose, as the rostrum we call it. And you think, how does that shark get born? How does that rostrum make its way out of the mother? They are born with a little protective sheath on their rostrum, which they then shed after a couple of days, so that it protects them as they're in the womb and when they're born. I like that one.
I think one of the things that is really important is that we are discovering new shark species all the time. over 25% of the species that we know about have only been discovered in the last 20 years. So how cool is that? That we're learning so much more about these different animals in the ocean. We know more about space than we do about the ocean. And so that I think is really cool.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I will say, in researching this episode, I did learn a lot of interesting facts about shark reproduction. A lot of the materials actually came from the SAFE website and whatnot. But I learned that egg sacs for sharks are maybe, and I'm probably using the wrong terminology here, for those that don't give live birth, are called, or they're not, wait, no, now I'm forgetting what they're called, but they look like purses. Mermaid's purse is what, yeah, look at that. Paul's got one right there. So that was one of the fun facts that I learned. Another fun fact that maybe this isn't a fun fact and you guys can debunk this right here on the show, but I heard that sharks actually predate trees in terms of like being on this planet. Is that true?
Yeah. And they also predate the Himalayas. So the evolutionary history of sharks goes back somewhere, I mean, this is a big margin of error, somewhere between 400 and 450 million years in one form or another. So yeah, they've got a pretty long life history, and they've made their way through a number of major extinction events. From the Cambrian explosion, there's a whole bunch of weird sharks that kind of appeared and then disappeared again. So yeah, in one form or another, sharks have been around for 400 million odd years.
Now, just to put that into perspective, 400 million years ago was when the first insects originated on Earth. So yeah, sharks have seen a lot. And the fact that they've been around for so long is a testament to their resilience.
Yeah, adaptive and resilient. So I think it's a bit of both. So they've managed to adapt to the new conditions, and then kind of have these growths of different species, and then when the conditions change, they adapt again, and they have that kind of resilience built in.
And when you think about those adaptations and you think about that sharks inhabit every ocean environment on the planet, including Antarctica, they can even live in freshwater ecosystems. Some species can survive in freshwater ecosystems. Just the variety of life history strategies, of reproductive strategies that they have adapted over these millions of years leads to that resilience. And the sad thing is that humans are, causing these animals populations to decline and even to go extinct quicker than any other event that's ever happened on the planet. And so, and there's all these species we haven't even discovered yet, right? So we would hate for animals, new species to become extinct before we even get to learn about them.
It's July, and we all know what that means. Shark Week. This year, it's July 26th through August 1st, but why wait when you could instead celebrate all month long for Shark and Ray Awareness Month? Shark and Ray Awareness Month is a wonderful opportunity to learn and get involved in conservation efforts to protect endangered marine species. And this July, we're focusing on oceanic species. These are sharks and rays that spend a majority of their time swimming the high seas, bouncing around international waters throughout their lifetimes. Why oceanic sharks? Because according to a 2021 report from the Global Shark Trends Project, there's been a 71% decline in their populations over the last 50 years, and 75% are now threatened with extinction.
So yeah, the report that you mentioned, the Oceanic Shark report, this came out in 2021, I think. And this refers to oceanic sharks are a particular kind of subgroup of the sharks and rays. It's about 31, 32 species, something like that, which have particularly suffered as a result of overfishing. Now, kind of if you broaden that out a bit, this report came out as part of what's called the Global Shark Trends Project, a huge amount of work that went on between about 2015 and 2021, 2022, which really tried to assess the state of all of the world's sharks and rays. And the overall picture for sharks and rays is that 1/3 of species, so we talked about 1,200-ish species, and 1/3 of those are in on the red list in classes threatened with extinction. So that's a big challenge for us to be able to deal with those. Now, of those sort of 400 odd species, 100% of the time, the reason for them being in those threatened categories is overfishing.
While the primary threat to shark and ray populations is overfishing, Paul mentioned secondary causes like climate change and habitat destruction are also threatening these species into extinction.
For example, lemon sharks are well known to use mangroves for their nursery ground, and so if you get mangroves destruction as part of building lovely new hotels, then you have the sharks are suffering from that as well, and then you have pollution effects as well. So habitat destruction, climate change, pollution effects, they're secondary, but the primary one is overfishing. When we talk about 71% decline, that's 71% decline in the abundance of their population. But the other piece of that is that 75% of those 32 species are classed as threatened with extinction. And just to hammer that home, in 1980 there was one of those species. Now there are 20. So there's a real big shift for those species, and that's something that really needs urgent action.
This is the primary mission of the AZA's SAFE program, which stands for Saving Animals from Extinction. This program works with all sorts of species and subspecies groups, including sharks and rays, but also things like pangolins, the African elephant, sea turtles, bonobo monkeys, and many, many more to save the most vulnerable wildlife species from extinction and protect them for future generations. There are roughly 50 SAFE programs operating right now around the world, and one key conservation initiative for these populations is improving the way that we fish, for us and for animals.
I would like to say that, from the Safe Shark and Ray program, we are in support of sustainable fisheries. So sustainably managed fisheries that have good data. But the overfishing that Paul is referring to is often unreported, unregulated, and unsustainable fishing of sharks. Some of that is bycatch. Some of that is targeted fisheries. But one thing that I think is important is we've heard so much about the shark fin trade, and that it's shark finning and at SAFE, we really try to put some facts out there that currently the global meat trade for sharks and rays exceeds the demand for fins. So fish is a protein source for 1 in 7 people on the planet. People need protein to live, to survive, to eat. And so fish is an excellent source of protein. And that meat trade actually exceeds the demand for meat exceeds the demand for fins. And so we need to kind of shift our mentality from thinking about this is finning as the issue, but it's really not just finning, it's fishing for all parts of these animals to be used for food and or other cultural reasons as well.
As the meat trade is way more complex. The meat trade is, there's domestic consumption, there's movements of meat that's caught in one country to other countries. So there's this really kind of complex web of trade, which is really important to kind of understand that's what makes shark conservation so complex. You've got such a diversity of fisheries, you've got a diversity of trade, you've got a diversity of products, and that kind of just expands the complexity of the issue and of the solutions that are available to us. I suppose the other thing that's worth kind of coming back to your question was that sometimes people kind of see sharks as being separate to other types of fish, other things that are swimming around in the water, but they are, they're ultimately occupying the same niche. So they swim with fish, they get caught with fish, they are fished like fish, but they have quite a different life history in that their life history is more like a mammalian life history. They are slow to mature, they late to mature, slow to reproduce, and they reproduce at a very low rate. So when they're fished at kind of commercial levels, but they have this sort of inadequate way of reproducing to kind of compensate for that, that's when you run into problems, and that's when you get overfishing. Overfishing at its simplest is just fishing more than the ability of the population to reproduce and replenish itself. So that's a kind of key point about sharks. You have to understand the life history. Coming back to what I said earlier, that not all sharks are the same. So there are some sharks which can reproduce more quickly and therefore could be fished and sustain a managed fishery. There are other sharks which reproduce much more slowly, and therefore they find it very, very difficult to manage any kind of fishery. So it's really important to look at sharks, different species in different ways, understand their life history, understand the population structure, and then build a kind of conservation strategy based upon those individual characteristics. So yeah, it's a really complex picture. It's not just about the fishing, it's about the markets as well. It's about the trade. It's about the whole, everything from the sea to the plate. And that's the kind of understanding that we have to kind of wrestle with in trying to find solutions to these issues.
This is a complicated web of fisheries and global trade, and sometimes the consequences show up where we least expect, in our pets' food.
So yeah, there have been a couple of studies in the past 6 years where they've looked at pet food and they've done some DNA analysis in different products. And they have been able to match some of the DNA that's in the pet food to endangered species of sharks like the short-fin mako shark, which is near and dear to the SAFE program, as we have done a lot of policy action around protection for the species of mako shark. They found blue sharks, they found silky sharks, white tip reef sharks, all sharks that are potentially threatened or endangered.
This comes back to the concepts of overfishing and bycatch Paul and Wendy were explaining earlier, but highlights another important issue in pet food, and that's transparency. Most seafood used in pet food is labeled vaguely as ocean fish or whitefish, which aptly represents the way a lot of these fish are actually caught, right? Think about smaller fish naturally school, meaning they huddle together for protection. And when you have a school of fish, you'll also have hunters looking for their next meal. So when you're dropping down a giant net onto a school of fish and multiple different species, it's not surprising that something else might get caught by mistake.
When those fish have heavy metals like lead or mercury or different thing, cadmium that they've ingested, as it works its way up through the food chain, it biomagnifies and it gets more saturated. And as pet owners, our pets are our family, and we don't want to feed our pets food that could potentially harm them. And so a lot of this meat may not have been tested for these heavy metals or these things that we wouldn't want to be feeding our animals. Even if we don't care about sharks, we care about our pets. So I think, traceability and having some transparency in labeling is really important as we move forward to ensure that these threatened and endangered sharks aren't ending up in our pet food.
Transparency sounds easy when we're talking about it like this, but in reality, it can get really complicated really fast.
There is still, in a lot of parts of the world, there's a lack of ability to define what species is being caught. And there are large groups of sharks that all look very, very similar. And so what you end up with is a kind of when the sharks are landed, you end up with a bucket labeled sharks, and everything goes in. That traceability that we need in the supply chain goes way back to the fisheries. It means working with the fisheries enforcement officers, and with the people in the markets to be able to define what species are being caught and where, so that traceability can follow right through to the consumer. And then the consumer can make informed choices. And it's not necessarily that all shark products cannot be caught in a sustainable way, as I mentioned before. There could be sustainable shark products making their way into the market. But we have to know that, and we have to know the traceability.
Yeah. And I'd like to say that, at Safe Shark and Ray, we're not just talking about this, but we are trying to walk the walk, as they say. We have a sustainable seafood initiative where we're working with zoos and aquariums to ensure the sustainability of the feed for the animals in their care. So looking at what is in their freezers and are these sustainably harvested fish? We're doing nutritional analysis on the most common feeds. We're working with Seafood Watch, which has a sustainable feed program that is primarily for human consumption. So it's not necessarily comparing apples to apples at times, because a lot of the fish that we're feeding our animals are not for human consumption. So we're working with Seafood Watch to get those species assessed and rated for sustainability as well. But we are trying to work within our industry to ensure that we are only purchasing sustainable fish to feed the animals in our care.
The AZA Safe Shark and Ray program can't succeed in a bubble. So they partnered with various organizations to amplify their impact. 2 of those partnerships are with Seafood Watch, a program of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, or ACP. And both support the goal to source more sustainable food sources for animals in our zoos and aquariums. According to Kim McIntyre, executive director of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership, seafood is a big part of mealtime for all these critters.
So just alone, AZA accredited institutions procure an estimated 17 million pounds of seafood annually for animal diets, and that's just across about 250 institutions. And data that we did from an assessment of 54 aquariums and zoos indicated that 55% of the species, or 25% of the volume of the seafood fed to animals at these institutions, have an unknown sustainability status. So that means they're not certified, they're not rated by Seafood Watch. And so these gaps really highlight an urgent need for improved transparency and sustainability assessments within the seafood supply chain altogether.
This is where Seafood Watch comes in. Seafood Watch rates the environmental sustainability of wild fisheries and aquaculture operations, basically farming fish, and publishes those ratings using a basic stoplight rating system. Red is avoid for now, yellow is buy but beware, and green is all good. Seafood Watch looks at a specific set of criteria when assessing wild fisheries. And these aren't quick check-ins. According to outreach manager Tally Height, an assessment can take years.
The wild fisheries criteria is 4 criterion. So they're looking at the impacts on the stock itself. So that would be like your stock assessments, is the population at a healthy level, basically. They're looking at the surrounding habitat. So is the fishing method that's occurring degrading the habitat? They're looking at management effectiveness. So even if the stock is healthy, the habitat's healthy, if there's not precautionary measures in place that were set by the fishing management, so like the government that has regulatory body over the fishery, if that's not happening, then who knows if it's going to stay sustainable in the future. So that's a criteria as well. And then bycatch is our 4th criteria, which is when other non-target animals, so not what you're fishing for, are being caught in the fishing process. So those are just the 4 for wild. So essentially what our scientists do is that when we're going to assess a fishery, they reach out to the government bodies, stakeholders in the fishery, whether it be fishers themselves or conservation groups, anyone that has information about the fishery, we would welcome and look for that when doing the assessment. And then they get all of their findings from each of those criteria, and they each criteria gets a numerical score, essentially, that then builds into the final rating.
Now, Seafood Watch is not a certification body. The Marine Stewardship Council, or MSC, and the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, or the ASC, those organizations actually accredit sustainable fisheries. Seafood Watch is more of a PSA.
But in addition to that, we are non-voluntary, meaning that we prioritize assessments based on what's important on the North American market. So we look at what's coming in, what are Americans eating, where is our assessment needed the most, and we assess a fishery or aquaculture production regardless of if they want us to or not.
But there's a catch. Literally. Most of what these animals eat has never been rated at all.
The biggest barrier to sourcing sustainable seafood for feed is just the fact that the majority of the feed that we feed animals is not necessarily assessed right now. So we don't know how sustainable a lot of the fish is. And that's because most of the fish that we feed are forage fish species, which don't commonly make their way to like American and North American diets. And so we are working closely with Seafood Watch to look at the most common fisheries that we are getting the fish from for the animals and to get those assessed.
And just one more wrinkle. If y'all thought feeding zoo animals was easy, guess again. They're actually notoriously picky eaters.
We need to make sure that we're providing the utmost nutritional components for our animals because we have the highest standards for well-being and welfare. So we need to make sure that the food is nutritionally excellent that we're giving them, but there's also palatability. The animals in our care are adapted to eating a variety of foods. You know, some like crunchy foods, some like big fish, some like small fish. And so swapping out one fish for another, it's not that simple. We have to make sure that the animals are going to want to eat it, right?
We could find the most sustainable swap, but if the animal, and that even comes down to individual animal choice. And so we work really closely with nutritionists and animal care specialists to make sure that, you know, diversifying the diet to these animals so they don't just get stuck or, you know, eat their favorite food. Like, you know, your kid will only eat chicken nuggets or something. So we need to make sure that the animals are being exposed to a real diverse diet in order to make it more sustainable and to make sure that they're getting the nutrients they need.
When you put all this together, you get a beautiful partnership. Zoos and aquariums across the country and around the world working together to protect sharks, rays, and other marine species year-round, not just for 1 week in July.
Hallie and the Seafood Watch team have been instrumental in the project that we launched with AZA Safe Shark and Ray that Wendy and Paula are part of. And so that's all together. We're aiming to accelerate the transition to sustainable seafood alternatives for animals in our care by advancing the identification and adoption of sustainable or neutrally sound practical feed solutions that support both the health and well-being of the animals in our care, as well as the health of our oceans.
So what can you actually do with all this information? As it turns out, there are actually a ton of tools that make shopping for more sustainable seafood easier for us and for our pets. Tally shared a few from Seafood Watch.
Seafood Watch as a program is always working towards making things that consumers can utilize when shopping and dining. So we have our iconic pocket guides that we send to all of our zoo and aquarium partners. You can find them at your local zoo or aquarium. You can also download them from our website and reference them when you're shopping or dining. We also just launched our new Best Choice restaurant program, which is really, really exciting. So essentially what it is a restaurant that serves at least one green rated seafood item can sign up, and they get a little cling that denotes them as a Best Choice Restaurant Program partner on their door. But also what's great is that on the menu itself, the iconic Monterey Bay Aquarium kelp swirl will be on the menu in green next to the seafood item that is green rated, and the provenance information must be printed there. And so what that denotes is that this seafood is caught or farmed in a sustainable way based on our criteria, so that all of that sometimes yucky for some people call to action where like I have to ask my server where this is from, that's gone. The onus is off of the consumer. And it also shouts out restaurateurs and chefs that are doing the good work and trying to source sustainably. So it's celebrating their efforts as well. In addition to that, we're also working on a new consumer app that can be utilized whilst shopping or dining for those same kind of questions that maybe you have a follow-up to the guide. The app will be more user-friendly.
Wendy was also eager to share some practical actions we can take in our own lives to support wildlife conservation for sharks and other endangered species.
A lot of times it at the individual level, it can feel overwhelming and like, what can I do? And there are things that individuals can do to really look at those more indirect or secondary causes to shark and ray decline. And I don't want to leave those out. The things that Paul are talking about are vitally important to the protection of sharks and rays and have to be worked on at the system level. As an individual, what can you do? So in addition to looking at your pet food, you can avoid buying products. A lot of shark products are in your cosmetics and personal care products. People don't realize there can be squalene in your lipstick. So I like to share with people to avoid products that list squalene or shark liver oil as an ingredient. If it does list squalene, I have seen where there's plant-based squalene that you can purchase. But if you're buying vegan personal care products, then no animals were harmed in that. So that's something that people can do. You can also look at how you are addressing your energy usage. Something very simple. Climate change is an issue for about 10% of shark species. So reducing your energy consumption. There are very easy ways that you can do that at home. One of the things I like to share is please unplug your chargers when you are done charging your devices. Your chargers can increase your energy consumption by up to 10% a month. So you're paying for that energy. And it's really simple. Unplug your chargers. Tell your kids to unplug their chargers. Reducing your energy consumption.
For Kim, the most powerful tool we have at our disposal is a vote for the ocean.
So we think a healthy and resilient ocean really depends on decisions you make on your ballot. And so we are launching a campaign called Vote for the Ocean, where we're asking people to use their vote to be the voice for our ocean that sustains diverse communities of people and wildlife. And so votefortheocean.org allows you to register to vote, check your registration, follow your local elections, know what the deadlines are. And so being part of that process, we think is the most important thing that you can do to protect the ocean.
And for Paul, it's all about staying curious, using that curiosity to learn and drive change.
And I think the one jigsaw piece, the easiest one for anyone who's watching, the easiest one for anyone to do is to learn, is to find out more and educate yourself. I was a child of the 1970s and 1980s, right? If I wanted to learn about sharks, I had to get a bus into town. I had to go to the building from the library. I had to find a time when it was open. I had to go in and use a weird card system to find out where to find a book. I had to get a big book off a shelf, open it up, and read text to try and learn something about these animals. We all walk around with so much information in our pockets, on our desktops. There's podcasts, there's YouTube videos, there are websites, there's Instagram. There's so much that we have accessible to us to allow us to learn more about these amazing animals and about the threats that they face and about the solutions at a system level and also individual level. So I would say just get into it, just learn more about sharks, because once you're in, you can't escape.
So the next time that two-note theme song starts playing, remember what we actually know. Sharks are older than trees, more diverse than we ever give them credit for, and they're in real trouble. Not because they're dangerous to us, but because of how we fish, trade, and label what comes out of the ocean. The good news is there's a whole network of people working to turn that around, and you can be part of it as well. Whether that's checking your pet food labels more closely, asking where your seafood came from, or simply using your vote. A huge thanks to Wendy Airy Kent, Paul Cox, Kim McIntyre, and Tally Height for sharing their time and insights with us today. We'd also like to thank the very good boys and girls behind this podcast: Jacob Parker, Katie Wolf, Neely Bowden-Lewis, Ada Miette Thomas, Holyfield, and Ada Guilfoyle. A special shout out to David Perez and his viola shredding son, Dean, for our original music. See you next time.